Are you ready to start dreaming and overanalyzing hypothetical trades? Because the week is finally here and we are so close to the trade deadline, I can practically taste it.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, it is a massive week. For the Jets, I have talked about it perhaps being one of the biggest weeks in Winnipeg's recent history. This is a really big moment for Winnipeg where everything that they have tried to build the past couple of years kind of feels like it's coming to a head, right? This is a year where the Jets kind of have to go for it. And I think Winnipeg understands the moment. I've talked about it for several episodes. Now it's time to start talking about what it might actually take to get something done. And, one of the biggest trade partners that I've thought the Jets should probably pursue is, it's going to be Seattle. And the Kraken, look, they have fallen out of a playoff spot. Things are not looking great. And if you ask me, I think that they have a couple of really big names that actually fit the Jets quite well. And when I say big, I mean a little bit literally in some senses. But, the biggest name the Jets have kind of been linked to among many other teams, right? Because a lot of people actually want some of the same players. It's going to be Jared McCann. And McCann has another 2 years after this. He's signed for just $5 million. He's putting up anywhere between 60 to 70 points a season. And if you actually look at his underlying numbers, he has been one of the most positive shot share players on that Kraken team for several years now. He's putting up elite first line underlying numbers. And while these, the box scores may not 100% be there quite at the same level, I think if he moves to another team where their offense is a little more consistent, he's got more power play opportunities, I think you could see him really pop off. Alongside him would be Jamie Oleksiak, who's got another year at around $4.5 million. And Oleksiak, I think, is one of those players where his reputation maybe precedes what he actually does. And the reputation is that he's a big physical defender who's, a gritty guy, and that's kind of it. But Oleksiak actually has some really underrated puck moving and offensive chops that I think tends to go a little bit under the radar. So you're not just getting a one-dimensional, grindy, hitty sort. You're actually getting a pretty fully faceted player. And for the Jets, I think that this is a really good opportunity to try and figure out how to solve two problems, right? Your 5v5 offense has kind of stagnated a little bit, and your third pairing needs veteran experience that's actually good enough to play on a routine basis, and you have a little bit of term, so you have another year. And, the media continues to talk about the next 2 to 3 years for the Jets, which I think is pretty much Winnipeg saying that this is what they view their window as. The next 2 to 3 seasons, this is where they're going to start putting feet to pavement to try and make things happen. And a McCann package is probably about as big of a swing as you would ever see this team make. Winnipeg traditionally has never done this. They don't trade for players with term. They just don't. They go for rentals and cheap bargain buys, which for many years has actually worked out pretty darn well. But this year, I think the Jets sense a level of urgency because the cap's going up, Winnipeg's a small market, and things are going to change once you move out of this flat cap era. And so for Winnipeg, they have to be willing to sacrifice a lot to win. And the PDOCast from Dmitry Filipovich came up with a really interesting proposal that I think, in my mind, is actually maybe a little bit cheaper than I would expect. I know it's going to sound really expensive, and don't get me wrong, it is. But I think when you consider the context of the market right now, what the Jets are getting, and what they're really chasing, you kind of have to do something like this. And it hurts me personally because it involves a couple of prospects I really like. But there's very little that I will say I'm not willing to see go to another team if it means that you're getting a McCann, an Oleksiak in quality back. So PDOCast, their proposal is Lambert, Hanola, this year's first, a conditional second from next year, which converts to a first if the Jets make the Western Conference Finals, and a 27 third, which, if you ask me, I actually, at first blush, I thought, okay, yeah, that's about right on track. But then I really started thinking about this package, and, two modest firsts, if the Jets advance that far. Basically a no-name prospect at this point, because like Hanola doesn't really have trade value. A toss in the third rounder, and Lambert for, a top line, essentially a top line player in McCann, and a pretty good top four defender in Oleksiak, who's going to play in your third pairing, doesn't actually seem that crazy. You're getting 2 years on McCann, and if things really don't work out, the thing with McCann is that you could actually trade him again, right? Assume the worst, you could still probably recoup some of this package. Maybe not all of it, but enough to where I would actually say it's really worth making this sacrifice. And again, as somebody who loves Lambert, this hurts a lot. I would actually think the Jets need to add on top of here because, for one thing, McCann has trade protection, so you're going to have to convince Seattle that, he's worth allowing the team to talk to, right, to waive. The Jets need to pay that high entry fee, which comes with a natural tax, and they're also going to be competing with a lot of other teams that are going to see McCann's cap hit, his term, and his production, and just go all out. So if the Jets were to swing this, I think that they have to really pony up. I wouldn't be shocked if Seattle looks at this as like bringing in maybe a Barlow 2 or another pick or something. I just feel like there needs to be more in this package before Seattle kind of agrees. And it's crazy because this is a huge package, but assuming that, we're talking about the sort of value that McCann would probably immediately deliver for the Jets, which is top 6 value immediately on extremely team-friendly term and a really good third pairing guy, I have a hard time seeing the Jets not being able to pony up here. I think they're going to have to. I think that's what it's going to take. The only thing that may be a little bit of a saving grace, and maybe why this package kind of gets notched down just a little bit from what it would be if it was just McCann, is because you are taking Oleksiak's salary. Now, look, I think Oleksiak is actually not really that overpaid. He's a little expensive, and because of that extra year, that's a fair bit of cap space you're tying up. But I think if you consider the longer term of what the Jets are trying to do here, he fits Winnipeg's window kind of ideally. But for the Kraken, they'd probably love to have some of the cap space back. Freeing up nearly $5 million is kind of a big deal. So the Jets would kind of be doing Seattle a little bit of a favor by taking on his contract too. And Winnipeg has more than enough space to make this happen. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think that this package, for both parties, really makes a lot of sense. I do think the Jets need to add some kind of a sweetener. I don't know how big it needs to be, who it needs to be, or what it needs to be, but it's got to be something that can kind of get this deal over the finish line, because I look at this and I think there's maybe a little bit of pause from the Kraken because they might get a better competing offer somewhere else. And if this trade doesn't work out, there are other options. We have a few moments here to talk about a couple of other names that I've heard and maybe some suggestions from some Jets fans. Some of them are going to be more on the depth side of things. Some of them are also really big swings, and they have some really long-term implications if the Jets were to do it. We'll chat about some of those options here in just a brief moment. But before we go too much further, I did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. And they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I actually like the shelled variety. I'm somebody who's very tactile. I think cracking open a nut and enjoying a good pack of pistachios or almonds or any other kind of nut is just way more fun. Maybe that's the Marylander in me. We're used to cracking open crabs, so having a pack of shelled nuts is pretty much right up our alley. But if you're not that kind of person, they've got a shellless variety. They come in many great flavors, seasoned, unseasoned. They are delicious. They are nutritious. They are a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids. And of course, if you're looking for something to help you, whether it's before a workout or maybe just an afternoon pick-me-up, it's a small, convenient serving. It's great for you, and it's super easy to grab on the go. So get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us as we are kind of coming across, the final few days of the pre-NHL trade deadline, and with the Jets really sitting pretty, as far as I'm concerned, with this whole trade market. The Jets really could go almost any direction. They've been linked to a lot of names. Most of them are a little underwhelming, but I'm not really worried about that. If you ask me, I kind of feel like Winnipeg is doing what I like to call a little bit of cloak and dagger. Winnipeg is always one of those teams where if they tell you what they're doing, it's probably not the truth, or at least partly the truth. I think the Jets have often done this thing where they'll tell you sort of their backup plans, but their real targets tend to go under the radar. Maybe they're a little bit hidden, and the Jets aren't going to communicate that explicitly until later. So usually you find out right before a deal goes through that this is really what the Jets were after. And I think in that respect, they've generally played the market extremely smartly. And so that kind of brings me to a lot of different trade options here. We're going to focus more on individual names than just packages. There may be some conversation about a major package with a team like the Buffalo Sabres, which, let me tell you, there are some fascinating scenarios here. But let's start off with a couple of more depthy names, right? Some players that might be in Winnipeg's wheelhouse. A guy that somebody suggested, and a player I've talked about before, Tommy Novak might legitimately be available out of Nashville. He's not really signed long-term. I think he has one more season after this. But, the Preds kind of need to blow things up. I don't know what's going on with that team. I don't know how they could have possibly gotten this bad. Maybe signing all these aging veterans kind of slowed the team down to the point where Burnett doesn't really have the ability to play his, loose, fast hockey that he likes to. But one thing's for sure, right? They're going to be sellers. And I think Nashville would probably be willing to do a deal with the Jets under the right circumstances. Novak, I wonder if you could exchange Gustafsson or Kupari, something of that nature, plus a pick or two in exchange for Novak. I think that could be a very intriguing fit. If it's like Gustafsson, he's really more than I think people have, seen from him so far. I think he's got legitimate offensive chops. He's a great forechecker and a creator. And in that respect, I could see Nashville kind of liking his physicality for their bottom or middle six. And perhaps this is where he finally gets a chance to play an elevated role in a position down the middle. So big fan of Gus. You know that for a long time. I've really enjoyed this game. That one would hurt, but Novak would immediately be an upgrade at 2C, right? I think he slides in perfectly, and with how the Jets like to kind of run their middle six, I think he could be an ideal fit. I like him a lot. I think his skill is underappreciated, and that three center rotation of Scheifele, Lowry, and Novak could really be almost unbeatable. That's a fantastic trio, and I think Novak wouldn't really take a lot of time to fit in here very quickly. Another name out from Vancouver I've thought about, is Connor Garland. He comes up every year, I think, just because he feels like an odd man out sort of player, even though he's kind of like, I would like to say, diet Brad Marchand. He's chippy, small, undersized, but incredibly feisty, very underrated goal scorer and a very smart player. And you look at his contract, it's a tad bit expensive in some ways, but I think for the kind of role that he'd play for Winnipeg and what I could easily see him doing here, which is probably putting up like 50 or 60 points a season, he makes a lot of sense. The Canucks, I kind of feel like, are a little bit adrift. They're trying to figure out something to spark the team. Pettersson is in a real slump. The rest of the team is kind of uncertain outside of like Hughes. And with the team feeling like they're trying to recover the magic of last year, maybe they do something to the core to shake it up. And Garland would be a guy who, he's got a little bit of term. He could be swapped out, and I think he actually makes a lot of sense for the Jets. You might not be able to get Marchand to come here, but Garland, I think, is kind of a similar player archetype. Is he as purely talented? No. But I think, alongside Lowry and Niederreiter or something, he could absolutely crush his minutes. I think he'd be a fantastic add, and he adds the level of skill that I think has kind of been missing from that line. The line's almost there to being excellent, in terms of like all of the underlines, their two-way value and everything, they're there. The finishing is the one part that they just don't have enough of. And so if you add a Garland, you are going to get that. I think it makes a lot of sense. I'd like it, and it would be a ton of fun. Another name that we've heard about, and this is maybe a little more expensive than just depth, but it's Mario Ferraro, and I don't really know that I am like hot to trot for Ferraro. He's a solid, interesting two-way puck mover. The problem is that his results from his time in San Jose have just been really grim, and I don't really blame him entirely for that. It's kind of hard for me to focus on that because, well, let's be honest, right? The Sharks are just bad defensively. Their structure is all over the place. They give up loads of chances, and so it may not really be his fault. But I just, he's 26. Given the price range that I think he could command on the market, I don't know if I really want to take that risk. I'd want somebody with a little more certainty like Wallman. Wallman would make a ton of sense, but he may be going to another team. Everyone's scouting the Sharks right now, so there may be a fair bit of competition for some of those signatures, and we know that the Jets tend to like to operate under the radar just a bit. Now, this last group that I think I'm interested in has a number of different players who could be on the market and on the move. The easiest one out of Buffalo is Alex Tuch. Tuch seems to be a very coveted player. I like him a lot. I used to call him like mini Blake Wheeler. And, Vegas, I think a couple of other teams, LA has had interest. A lot of squads are after him. So I've kind of put him more towards the rear view. He's also an expiring free agent. So for me, I kind of want a little more control. And I think the Jets do too. That brings us to a really intriguing name that I did not expect to be available. JJ Peterka. Peterka, is an extremely talented early 20s player. This year he's putting up pretty decent numbers, 47 points in 57 games. And he might not be an elite play driver himself, but I think as a guy who's like a big shot generator and has increasingly earned a prime offensive role in a young team, his creativity, his skill, his vision and playmaking and shooting, plus his really good skating, make him a really elite complementary player. And if you play him alongside a Lowry or something, again, remember I was talking about Garland being that really good finisher. Peterka would absolutely be that kind of guy. And it also gives you a wing replacement for Ehlers, because I do have a feeling that Ehlers is going to be departing. Now, Peterka's transition game is not at the same level that Nick's is. It doesn't have to be, though. I think you can get away with having other elements of his game be really strong. And Peterka is a growing, developing forward. He is basically in his prime right now, so I don't know how much more he's really going to drastically improve. But if you're looking to make a big bet on a player who's very skilled, who's, not exactly small, he's 6 foot, so he's, a reasonable size and he's fast. I like his game a lot, and I think he would be an immediate fit for the Jets. I was a little surprised to hear that he might be available, but I guess the Sabres are trying to make some things happen because they just don't seem to know what to do with their team. So, very interesting. Kind of in the same wavelength, I've given some thought about two names, Owen Power and Dylan Cozens. Power, I think, makes perfect sense for the Jets for the long term and present. He's also going to be really expensive. He's got an $8.5 million contract. He would immediately be, one of your top pairing guys, and he would command a fortune in a trade package. Cozens is, signed to a bit of an anchor deal right now, 7x7. And because of that, he's a bit of a reclamation project. And if you're the Jets and you think that you can make the money work in the coming seasons, do you try and swing a package with Power and Cozens to try and make the actual assets involved cheaper? Now, I'm not saying that this package is going to be cheap. It will be extraordinarily huge, right? We're talking one of the biggest blockbusters in recent memory, because you are still going for a top pairing young defender in Power who's got real size and mobility. But Cozens, he has the potential to become your 2C. And if you think you can coach him into a much better state, if you think you can get him to get back to real habits, I could be talked into trying to see how this whole package would work. The money doesn't really fit for me right now, and I think I have bigger questions about where Cousins' game goes, but it does kind of sort of make sense if you're the Jets. You're getting two potentially big upgrades, one that you're sure of in Power, one that you maybe could figure out with Cousins, and you've got them under relatively reasonable cap hits if they both pan out. Power, I really don't have any question about. Cousins, a little bit more of an unknown, a little bit of a question mark. But we all saw what happened with Kyle Connor since Bones and Arneal took over. I kind of wonder if whatever discipline issues that Cousins may have, whether it's a defensive work ethic issue or something like that, might resolve if you put him in this environment. And it's not that long ago that Cousins was putting up, 60 points or over 60 points. Again, though, there is a lot of risk with this. If he becomes a guy who's maybe putting up 50 or 60 points, you're okay with that. But if his overall two-way game is not really there, you probably have some questions and concerns about the longer term. But again, if you think that you can try and swing a package with Power and Cousins together, and it might make some of the assets a little bit less taxing than it would be just going for Power alone, I would be willing to entertain that. You're getting into like Lambert and Perfetti territory here, so very curious to know what that would look like. But let me know your thoughts on all of this. Who are you hoping the Jets trade for? I know I've seen some suggestions. We've had all sorts of names thrown about. I think we are going to get something very interesting come Friday, and it may not be anyone that we've talked about so far. So give me your weird predictions, your weirdest trade suggestions in the comments below, or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. In just a moment, though, of course, we are about to play one of our other potential trade partners in the New York Islanders, a team that, quite frankly, is still clinging on to hope that they have enough of a chance of making the playoffs, but we all know that that's probably kind of done and dusted, especially since they just got shut out by the Rangers. Let's chat about what our opponents might look like and who the Jets could be watching closely in just a brief moment. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're just chatting about, some interesting things with Winnipeg's matchup later this evening with the New York Islanders. Obviously going to be a big game for both teams. The Jets want to get back to winning ways after a whole 2-game losing streak. Oh gosh, scary. One of those, oh no, anyways kind of moments, right? I think we all know that the Jets are still good. You're not really worried about them losing a couple of games. If anything, losing a couple of games was actually a necessity. It just reminds them that they're actually mortal once in a while. So while I would have loved to have seen a 12 or 13 game win streak, every now and then a loss here and there, just to remind you to keep up the work and keep up the intensity, probably isn't the worst outcome. Now, for the Jets, I don't really anticipate any changes. I think up front, they're probably going to do all the same stuff that they usually do. If there's one thing that's true about the Jets, it's that they are really dang consistent. On the back end, you do wonder if maybe they try and showcase Heinola for a trade. Maybe they swap in Heinola for Stanley. Probably not. I think at this point, Stanley has become a real staple in this lineup. I hope come Friday that maybe they change some of that thinking just because at this point, Logan has kind of proven that he's not really capable of doing this on a consistent basis. He had a solid game against the Flyers, but it's not frequent enough to where you feel comfortable taking him into the playoffs. Because I kind of feel like Arneal has told us he likes him enough to put him in the playoffs. And I'll be honest, I probably wouldn't trust that. I already have reservations about Pionk and DeMello in the postseason. Adding a third name to that list probably doesn't help the Jets' load. So let's hope that they figure something out to stabilize this blue line. On the other side of the equation, though, is the Islanders, and holy cow, they are just, what even is this team, right? Up front, you've got Lee, Horvat, and Pajot on your first line, Holmstrom, Nelson, and Palmieri on the second, Fashing, Cizikas, and Siplikov on your third, and then Mayfield, McLean, and Gakkom on the fourth. Yeah, if you think you can make the playoffs and actually have a deep run with this team, you are just fooling yourself. Lamoriello really needs to kind of wake up and see that this team just frankly needs to be torn down. There is not really anything here worth trying to scrap together. Now, the defense is maybe where you have a bit of a different response to that. On the first pairing, you've got Romanov and D'Angelo, then Pelech and Dobson on the second, and on the third, Bokvist and Pulak. There's actual names here that I like. You know me, I'm a big Dobson guy, and I think if you're targeting a young defender, Dobson would have to be one of the chief targets. He is an RFA, and that's going to be a little bit complicated, and I assume the Isles would ask the world for him. But for the Jets, if you're looking for that immediate top pair upgrade alongside Morrissey, he's a name that I would absolutely, just like Power, give a ton for. Pulak probably wouldn't cost you as much, and I think he would be a really good upgrade on that right side. I think he gives you more stability. He's got a big booming shot, and defensively, he's pretty sound. I think he's a little on the older side at this point, so, you're not really projecting him to be a long-term guy other than just a couple of seasons. But Dobson, he could be a player that the Jets really go after. With Nelson up front, Brock, I think, showed for Team USA that he is getting up there in years. But I still think if the price is right as a rental, he's totally fine, and I would still be very in favor of that. I think after you see him for the first couple of games with the Jets, a lot of those concerns about him will kind of ease away. Pageau, I kind of wonder about a little bit too, just because if it does take a joint package to try and free, Dobson out of there, would you take on Jean-Gabriel Pageau as part of the package, right? In the same way that I was sort of talking about, a Cozens and Power package, would Pageau kind of do a similar thing? JGB is a versatile player. He's got two different positions. He can play as a winger or as a center. He's done both. The thing with Pageau is that, he's on the older side, and his production really hasn't been that impressive. This year, his scoring rates have started to tick up again. He's got 30 points in 57 games, and traditionally has kind of been an industrious two-way forward, but I just don't know if, I love his game enough to really be enthralled. But if you get Dobson as part of it, and the package doesn't make you die, I wouldn't hate it. I did used to like Pageau back in his Sens days, and his early Islanders days didn't exactly go according to plan, but I think that with the Jets, he could actually put up some pretty decent numbers. You know what? I wouldn't be shocked if he goes closer to 50 or 55 points here with the Jets. I just feel like Winnipeg's offense is more naturally suited to what he likes to do, and I think Arneal would probably be a fan of his. So could I be talked into it? Maybe. I think that there's an intrigue to his game. Again, I don't know if he's crazy good, but this year, he's generally been a really positive shot share driver. The years prior, not so much. In fact, it's been pretty bad the past couple of years. But this season, compared to his line mates, he's been pretty good at 5v5. So if that's more reflective of what he can do, maybe it's worth taking a look at him for the present and immediate future. His term kind of makes sense for the Jets. He could fit a couple of different roles. And I guess if you're talking about a middle six upgrade that's kind of in the Jared McCann range, you're getting a very, I don't want to say budget Jared McCann, but that's kind of what he is. He's a very he's a very diet Jared McCann, so not quite at the same level, but as a middle six player, reasonable, and the cap hit's not crazy. So curious to know what you think about that one. If we're talking about predictions for the game, I think the Jets should get back to their usual ways. I would say Winnipeg comes away here with a 3-1 or 3-2 win. Give me your predictions, though. Let me know what you think about this game. Every time we play the Isles, something weird usually happens, so maybe it's going to be more 4-3 or 5-4. I don't know. We'll have to see. This Isles team is bad. If we really drop this game, that would be a little unfortunate. But maybe if the Jets do win, they can finally force the Isles to start selling. But give me your score predictions below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.